Welcome back to Sports Bash Saturday here on 97.3 ESPN. And joining me right now on the Boardwalk Kinda Hotline, it is ESPN NFL analyst Mike Clay. Mike, appreciate you coming back on the show today.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. Let's talk some football here.
Absolutely. We got to start with Thursday night because there may have been like 5 people on planet Earth who legitimately thought the Cowboys were going to win that game. Everyone had a theory how they could win, but they actually went out and did it, and they did it against the Saints team that has a high-powered offense, and they shut them out in the first half. Just kind of give the audience your perspective on how exactly the Cowboys got that done.
Well, first of all, I would have liked to know the score had the refs not had so much involvement in this one. I mean, the calls and the non-calls going both directions were insane in this one. So you wonder what, you hate to see really that have that much influence on the game. But nonetheless, the Cowboys come away with this one 13-10. Obviously, way more low scoring than we expected in this one. But it was an impressive effort. I mean, listen, the Cowboys do have a very good defense. We've seen that all season long. It's really starting to come together for them as of late. And we see bumps in the roads from great offenses. I mean, the Saints have been outstanding as of late and all season long. They'll bounce back. They could easily come back and put 30-40 on the board next week. I don't think there's anything to worry about. But this is one of the better defenses in the league. So that's what's going to keep the Cowboys competitive. As long as Dak Prescott can move the offense down the field, throw efficiently as he did in this game, and obviously Ezekiel Elliott's healthy and can do some things catching the football out of the backfield as well. They're going to be a contender this year, certainly in the NFC East, and maybe make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. I don't think they'll knock off New Orleans in New Orleans or beat the Rams in LA, but certainly they can maybe win a game and sneak to the second round.
The Cowboys, after being the Saints now, how do you rank them in the NFC? Because obviously most people agree it's Saints 1, Rams 2, or vice versa. But then after that, there's kind of like a group of teams all clustered in there. So how do the Cowboys, in your mind, rack up the teams like the Bears and others?
Well, I mean, first of all, you can't discount what they did in this game. I mean, we just watched the Eagles get destroyed by the Saints a few weeks ago. Now, granted, that game was in New Orleans, but nonetheless, to see the Cowboys even competitive with the Saints team has to be discouraging for fans of Washington, of Philadelphia. Certainly, if you think the Giants are going to get back into it, which is unlikely, that's not good. But if you align them in that conference, I think Saints and Rams obviously well ahead of that group. I think Chicago is still a better team. They have a better defense than even Dallas, and the offense has been scoring a ton of points when Mitch Trubisky's been in there. Minnesota, I would give them an edge as well. Again, very good defense, and they can score the football as well. It gets closer when you get down to Seattle, Carolina, even Green Bay. I think they would beat them right now, but it gets close in that sort of area. I'm interested to see how they do against Philadelphia in a couple weeks. I still think the Eagles have the talent on the roster to be the better team, but they just haven't shown it this season. They showed it last year. Obviously, they're outstanding all season long, and they have very similar personnel this year. They had injuries last season. They have injuries this season. It's bizarre, but if they can find a way to get some guys healthy in the secondary and start forcing turnovers, I mean, that's what the difference is for the Eagles, is forcing turnovers. If they can find a way to do that, they can maybe compete with a team like Dallas. So again, that's my long way of saying I think those kind of teams are all in the same category. Seattle, Carolina, Dallas, maybe Philadelphia, those kind of teams.
Mike Clay joining us on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Clay NFL. So let's talk about those Eagles. The NFC East, mathematically is still wide open for at least 3 of the teams. We'll just assume the Giants have no chance at this point, even though I think it's like a 1% chance they could possibly do. But the Eagles, this is the team that's scoring 8 less points per game than last year. And Mike, when I'm watching around the NFL, I see Frank Reich with the Colts. I see John DeFilippo with the Vikings, and I see them running plays that I saw the Eagles run last year. So is it really possible that the loss of Reich and DeFilippo have had that much of an impact that the team could be scoring 8 less points per game from one year to the next?
Yeah, no question. I definitely think that could be part of it. We don't really know exactly what sort of involvement they had, behind the scenes, drawing up plays with game planning and scheme. Certainly Frank Reich has been outstanding with Indianapolis so far. After a bit of a slow start getting Andrew Luck's feet under him, he has been one of the best in the business for sure. So there's something to be said for that. But I think the biggest deal here is the thing that's, again, not talked about as much. I mentioned it before, but you can determine basically 50% of a team's win total just off turnover margin. That is so important in the NFL. And the Eagles were near the top of the NFL in that department last season, not turning the ball over, forcing turnovers, had a great combination. This season, they're not forcing takeaways on the defensive side of the ball. They did not do a good job in the offseason addressing a secondary that was clearly a weak spot. And other teams took notice. Offenses came out and attacked the secondary. For Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby, even when they were healthy, they were picked on nonstop. Both of them were near the top of the league in cornerback targets. So now they're injury plagued on that side of the ball. Hicks is out. They're beat up in the secondary, and it's just going to be worse and worse and worse, unless it's the Giants, who for some reason decided not to attack the corners for whatever reason. But nonetheless, I fully expect Washington to do that and teams going forward. So, you asked about the offense, sure, but I think a lot of it is the fact that they're not forcing takeaways and setting up Carson Wentz with good field position. When he has to go all 80 yards or 75 yards almost every drive, you're not going to score a ton of points. You need the ball down near the goal line. You got to convert third downs. You got there's a lot going on. There are underlying issues here, but I think forcing takeaways is the best way for them to get the season on track.
You mentioned about the fact guys like Mills and Darby in the secondary, and you pointed out specifically they didn't address the lack of depth in the offseason. A lot of people in this area, they're pointing to, Jim Schwartz isn't doing a good enough job, or Doug Peterson's not doing a good enough job. But it sounds like you're saying that this is something that kind of goes on the front office, that they didn't give the coaches the best possible roster for 2018.
Well, certainly in the secondary. I mean, front seven, they were terrific. I think the Eagles came into the season as one of the best teams on paper. Obviously, they started slow. They had some injuries there with Wentz and Jeffrey, and that can take its toll for sure. Injuries, a super important variable in determining how a team's going to do, right along with turnover ratio. But on paper, this team was pretty good, pretty close to where they were last season, when we should not have been surprised they were going to be a good team. It was not they were clearly the best team on paper on the NFC East. Maybe not in the entire NFL. I don't know if I don't know if it was safe to say they were going to be a Super Bowl contender right out of the gate, but on paper you could certainly make a case for it in the off season. But this season, this past off season, I should say, they lost some personnel. Obviously, Patrick Robinson went to the Saints. A couple other guys left the team. But on the defensive side of the ball, it was very clear that if there was a weakness, it was at cornerback. Jalen Mills, just not a very good player. It was as seventh rounders in 2016 go. Fine. He's a hit at that point, but he should be a 3 or a 4 or a 5. He should not be your number 1 or 2. Ronald Darby's a solid player, but behind him there was a lot of question marks. Obviously, Sidney Jones coming off the injury. They were really praying for one of these young guys to be good, and it didn't happen. Not to mention that you had three 30-plus-year-old safeties that you were counting on, and that hasn't worked out. Corey Graham struggling since he's been promoted into that 2 job for McLeod, and McLeod obviously went down with the injury. So, there's still, again, I can't stress this enough. There's a lot of talent on this roster, and you could say that kind of about Dallas earlier this season, right? They started poorly, and you thought, wow, this team is at least an 8-win team, maybe a 9-win team. They have the talent. They just have to put it all together, figure it out. And they've done that. The Eagles have not done that, and they're running out of time. They have to get on track this week. If they lose to Washington on Monday night, that's it. I mean, after Dallas beat the Saints, they have to win this game, and the talent is there. So we'll see if they can get it done.
Let's touch on the other team in the NFC East, the Redskins. This is a team, they're on their backup quarterback now after the gruesome injury to Alex Smith. They have a retooled offensive line due to a bunch of injuries. They don't have the same type of talent and skill at the wide receiver position they had in the past. But the defense is still interesting. They got some talent over there. What do you think the Redskins are capable of down the stretch? They play the Eagles twice this month. And like we said earlier, the NFC East is still anyone for grab.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree there's no more important position in football and maybe even in sports than the quarterback position. So without Alex Smith, at least protecting the football and keeping them close and letting the defense win games, it's hard to expect much from Washington. I think they'll end up third in the division. If they beat Philadelphia Monday, they'll be the favorite for the 2 spot. I think Dallas is the favorite right now Maybe Philadelphia can make it interesting. But it's really hard to get excited about Washington. They've been very dependent on turnover margin, as mentioned before, and it's going to be hard to keep that up with Colt McCoy under center. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, they do have some nice pieces defensively. I mean, obviously, a pair of good safeties after they brought in Clinton Dix from the Packers. Josh Norman's there. You know, they have Zach Brown, a linebacker, Mason Foster, Kerrigan, and Preston Smith on the edge. They've invested a lot in the defensive tackle position. So this is a decent, probably underrated defense, and they've kept them competitive. Again, along with Smith not turning the ball over so far this season. But, you know, come on, if can a backup quarterback come in and win some games? Of course. We saw Nick Foles pull it off last season. It's very possible, but I just don't know if the team behind McCoy is as good as it was for Foles last season.
Mike Clay joining us, the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at Mike Clay NFL. He's an ESPN NFL and fantasy football analyst. Mike, I have a couple more questions for you, and I appreciate your time here on a Saturday afternoon on 97.3 ESPN. You know, when you look around the NFC, you know, we mentioned earlier about the Saints, the Rams, and then you have the next tier down. Do the Bears have the kind of defense that can disrupt what the Rams and Saints want to do in the playoffs? We know a lot of teams, they look good in the regular season, but can the Bears defense travel? Because we know they're going to have to travel to either New Orleans or Los Angeles to play them in the postseason.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I thought in the offseason when they traded for Khalil Mack, I thought this is going to be a good trade if Mitch Trubisky is a decent player. You know, that's really the key. If not, it's just a waste because you're not going to be able to score points offensively, and you're going to have a great defense and still not go anywhere. But Trubisky's been pretty good. The offense has really come around the past 2 months, and yeah, I think they have a shot. I mean, they could score some points. And if the defense can disrupt, as you said, these offenses, they can make it happen. And again, we just saw an example of that on Thursday night when the Cowboys were able to disrupt the Saints and stop one of the hottest offenses we've ever seen in the NFL. So I do think so. I mean, they may not have to play all of these teams depending if they knock each other out. But all you need to do is come in for 60 minutes and pull off one game at a time. And I think that with a level of talent across every position, I mean, we're talking interior defensive line. We're talking on the edge with Mack and Floyd at linebacker. They have a really good trio at cornerback that doesn't get talked about much, and one of the better safety duos in the NFL. I mean, it's just kind of almost it looks like the Eagles last season, aside of having better corners. So they're in great shape on that side of the ball. The O-line's good. I mean, as long as Trubisky can keep the ball moving down the field, not turn the ball over, add points with his legs, absolutely. I think the Bears can beat anybody on any given week.
You talked about Trubisky playing well. I want to ask you this question because I've kind of been having this conversation with people the last few weeks, and that is, I think sometimes when we're looking at the quarterback position, it's overlooked the fact that the quarterback is still dependent on the people around him. Like the offensive line doesn't block well, the wide receivers don't catch. If the coaching staff isn't good enough, the quarterback only can do so much. And you look at a guy like Trubisky and his fellow draft mates. Mahomes having an amazing season in Kansas City. Deshaun Watson coming off of his injury. His team is as hot as any team in the NFL right now. If you were to swap any of those guys with each other, if Mahomes was swapped with Watson or Trubisky was swapped with Watson or Mahomes, do you think those quarterbacks would be as successful in those other situations as they are in their current situation?
Well, I think no, not necessarily. I mean, I think scheme is super important. We've seen that time and time again. I mean, probably the best example is certainly the Bears are an example. Obviously, a lot of the personnel is similar on the offensive side of the ball. Granted, they overhauled at wide receiver, brought in Trey Burton, who hasn't made much of an impact, to be quite honest, this year, not as much as we thought. But a lot of that is Matt Nagy bringing in that Andy Reid offense to Chicago. We saw it with the Rams a couple seasons ago, right, when they went from Jeff Fisher to Sean McVay. That was obviously a major changeover. But then again, you see things like the Chiefs not changing much, but going from Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes, who is obviously a terrific player. That has made a major difference for that offense. And then you see Smith go to Washington, and they were not particularly good on the offensive side of the football. So there's not a single right answer. It's not one or the other. It's everything. It's a combination of good players, good personnel around them, good receivers, and certainly a good scheme and good coaching. That's really most important. And especially this season, the way this has gone, this explosion of offense, this league-changing, era-changing season, if you will. It's been a combination of good scheme and good quarterback play that has really been the difference from past seasons. So, there would certainly be a difference, but at the end of the day, if they're legit good players, they're going to rise.
One more for you, Mike, and I appreciate your time here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, follow Mike Clay on Twitter. He's got always great analysis on there about the NFL, and he writes great articles at ESPN.com. That's Mike Clay, NFL. Mike, the situation in Green Bay, everyone has a perspective on it. And I love to get your analysis because some people feel like Mike McCarthy is holding Aaron Rodgers back. That Mike McCarthy is the problem. And some people say, well, no, maybe the problem is Rodgers because maybe Rodgers isn't that easy to work with because there's a lot of times that a play gets called, he changes at the line almost immediately. So if you look at the Green Bay situation, if Mike McCarthy gets fired, how desirable you think that job is, and how much do you think it is McCarthy the problem versus maybe some other variables?
Yeah, I think it would be a great situation for a new coach. Obviously, you have Aaron Rodgers there. He's 34. He probably has 5-6 good years left in the NFL, and it's not hard to retool, if you will, in the NFL. We use rebuild a lot. It's not hard to go from a bad team to a good team with a coaching change and some savvy moves, especially when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And listen, the Packers are not – it's not like it's Aaron Rodgers and they're totally devoid of talent. There's some serious talent on this team, even on the offensive side of the ball. They have some decent players on the O-line. You have Devontae Adams, who's obviously emerged into one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Aaron Jones has turned into something at running back. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball. They've invested something in the draft the past few seasons, drafting Jair Alexander, Josh Jackson, Kevin King. They've really put a lot into that secondary, and Alexander has quietly turned into one of the better corners in the league this season as a rookie. He could be a potential superstar. So there's talent there. There's talent up front with Mike Daniels and Kenny Clark. Blake Martinez is there. Clay Matthews is still hanging around. He's not what he used to be, but he's still there. There is talent on this roster, and you make a few moves in the offseason, hit on a draft pick or two, bring in a new coach and change the scheme up a little bit, and suddenly, you're the favorite in the NFC North. It can happen. Look at Chicago's turnaround from last season as an example, and that's a team that doesn't have Aaron Rodgers. So, I think it's a great situation. And, if you hear anything like they should trade Aaron Rodgers and start over, that is complete nonsense. Come on. Listen, the guy's not 42, right? He's not playing poorly. The guy's 20 touchdowns and 1 interception this season. He's obviously a superstar. You build around him. He still has at least a half decade left, and there's some decent pieces here. So I'm really intrigued to see what they do this offseason.
Mike Clay joining us on the World Wakanda Hotline. Mike, I really appreciate your time here on a Saturday. Hope you enjoy the NFL weekend, and I know you're always busy, and I appreciate you taking the time out.
Anytime. Appreciate you having me on. Have a good one.